Welcome back to Reviews and Rankings with Robbie Sobel. Today, we're going to take a look at the 2025 film, 28 Years Later. But first, let's take a quick trip back in time to see how we got here by looking at 28 Days Later and its sequel, 28 Weeks Later. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the zombie film was at a low point. Following decades of cinematic brilliance within the subgenre, led by writer-director George A. Romero, the zombie film hit a wall. The days of Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead were in the past. Those films spawned many other hits, like Return of the Living Dead, Zombie, and offshoots like The Evil Dead. But by the time of the end of the century, horror fans seemed to have had enough of zombies on screen, unless they were playing against them in the Resident Evil video game series. Insert writer Alex Garland and director Danny Boyle. The pair had previously collaborated to adapt Garland's novel The Beach, with Boyle brought on board to direct, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. In 2001, Garland penned the screenplay for 28 Days Later, citing Romero's films as a heavy influence, as well as John Wyndham's 1951 novel, The Day of the Triffids. For 28 Days Later, however, there would be a noticeable difference. The antagonists would not be traditional undead slow-moving zombies, but rather humans infected by what we would now know as the rage virus. The virus would quickly turn humans into maniac-driven killers, removing all sense of self with the singular goal of killing and eating the uninfected in the quickest and most rapid way possible. Filming began in 2001 in London, most noticeably being shot using a Canon XL1 digital video camera, which is evident in the film's look and style, which was partially due to the production's low budget of around $8 million. The cast was led by Cillian Murphy, playing the lead of Jim, a bicycle courier who was previously in a coma after an accident, but awakens to find the world he remembered gone and replaced with a post-apocalyptic nightmare in the United Kingdom. Naomi Harris, Brendan Gleeson, and Megan Burns help fill out the protagonists who come together to survive the horror. The group run into a band of renegade soldiers led by Christopher Eccleston's Major Henry West, who have gone rogue, in part to lure female survivors into sexual slavery. Between the infighting on both sides and dealing with the rabid infected, 28 Days Later delivered an intense resurrection and twist on a subgenre that was thought to be dead and buried. 28 Days Later was released in the UK on November 1st, 2002, and then later in the US on June 27, 2003. Despite its low $8 million budget, the film took in a total of nearly $85 million at the global box office. The film has maintained its popularity and cult status over the years, currently holding an 87% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and an 85% audience score. In the years that followed, the infected and zombie subgenre was given a breath of life, which resulted in new takes on the genre, including a Dawn of the Dead remake by Zack Snyder in 2004, George Romero's return with Land of the Dead in 2005, and the popular The Walking Dead comic and TV series. With the rising success of 28 Days Later and the subgenre's resurrection, it was only a matter of time before its own sequel was released into the world. In 2007, 28 Weeks Later was released, but this time with different heads at the helm. Juan Carlos Fresnadillo was hired to direct the project with the blessing and encouragement of Danny Boyle. Rowan Joffrey wrote the original script, but it was later edited by an ensemble, including Fresnadillo. The story takes place 28 weeks after the conclusion of the previous film, with NATO forces and the US military closing down London, causing the infected to die of starvation. As part of the rebuilding effort, the US military, led by General Stone, played by Idris Elba, orders for survivors and refugees to be brought back into the city. One of the survivors is Don, played by Robert Carlyle, who fled the infected in the outskirts of London, but did so after making the decision to leave his wife Alice to be attacked in the process. After arriving back in the city, Don is reunited with his young son Andy and daughter Tammy. Don believes everything will work out until Andy and Tammy sneak out into the restricted area and return back home, only to find their mother alive and in a delirious state. We find out that Alice was infected but is immune to the virus. While unable to be impacted herself, she still acts as a carrier who re-exposes the virus back into society, resulting in mayhem and destruction within the city. 28 Weeks Later was released on April 26, 2007 in London, and in the United States a month later on May 11th. On a budget of $15 million, the film did well for a sequel, bringing in a global total of nearly $66 million. While not quite as well received as its predecessor, 28 Weeks Later garnered mostly positive reviews, currently holding a 72% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and a 66% audience score. With both films doing well, fans were anticipating a third entry in the series, with many crossing their fingers for 28 months later to follow. While that sequel never materialized, a new film was announced in 2024, with Alex Garland returning to write the screenplay and Danny Boyle jumping back behind the director's chair for 28 years later. All right, guys, it looks like we're all caught up with the 28 Days Later franchise, and that brings us to where we are today. I've just gotten home from watching 28 Years Later in the theater, and I have to say that after 18 years of waiting for the third entry in the franchise, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland did not disappoint. Now, 28 Years Later feels in a lot of ways that it does take place in the world that was created in the two previous films, but in other ways, it feels a little bit different. Now, Danny Boyle is a master of his craft. He has command of his camera, and Alex Garland is a fantastic writer. So when you're watching this film, it does feel large in scope regarding the set design and the cinematography, but in a lot of ways, the story does feel even smaller. It's an isolated story that really is focusing on one person and one person in particular. Now, this movie really centers around 12-year-old Spike, who lives with his father, Jamie, and his sick mother, Isla. Now, they live away from the mainland in an isolated community so people can live freely just like you might normally live in an everyday life away from the infected. There is a long strip and causeway that's highly protected that people can venture to if they ever need supplies, but this is really pushed back against. There's warnings that if you go and don't come back, no one's going to look for you. This is just what the society has written down and has lived by. They can't take any chances. Now, being 12 years old, Spike is ready for his, we can say, initiation into becoming a man. Now, cultures and societies have different ways of showing a boy how to become a man, and in this case, they take Spike out to the mainland. He goes with his father so they can experience some life with these infected and to kill them so he knows what it's like away from their isolated community. When they come back, everything seems to be okay. Everyone's partying and everyone's laughing, having a good time. His father, Jamie, who we get to know, is kind of embellishing what happened on the mainland, telling everybody that Spike was able to kill a lot of these infected people when that really wasn't the case. He got off a couple of shots, but you can tell he was really nervous, just like any old 12-year-old boy would be. Spike ends up finding out that his father is cheating on his mother, who is essentially on her deathbed. Spike also finds out that deep into the mainland, there's a survivor there who used to be a doctor before the chaos of the 28 Days Later franchise and the Rage virus kicked into gear. Being upset with his father and worried about his mother, Spike takes his mom and they sneak out of this isolated living space and community and head onto the mainland to hunt for the doctor. And this is where you can really see where Spike has these moments where he goes from a boy to a man, not just in facing these infected and killing them, but also dealing with the reality that his mom is not really going to make it much longer. We have moment after moment where Spike, you can see, kind of toughens up in a sense, and he becomes a man. And it's interesting to watch, and in a lot of ways, it's sad because you feel like you know what's going to happen to his mom, but it's also a societal victory, and is a victory more so for himself, that he's able to deal with all of these pressures on his own away from his father and really step up to the plate and do what has to be done. Now, in the previous two movies, the opening scene of both of those films really stood out, and it's something that people within the horror community have spoken about and really enjoyed. If you remember, in 28 Days Later, we have Jim wake up and he's kind of walking around this isolated and deserted area in London before the infected come after him. And there's this famous shot of him running as fast as he can with all the infected behind him. Then, of course, in 28 Weeks Later, we see the father and the wife and the kids and a few others living in this cottage, before shit hits the fan and the dad has to bolt and quickly leave his wife behind and run for the nearest boat so he can get out of there. It's really, really intense. 28 years later, I would say, even ups the ante. We're dealing with high intensity action. Nobody is spared in this. There's going to be, of course, some spoilers when I'm talking, but I'll leave some things to the imagination. And we'll just say that no matter what age you are, nobody is spared in this movie. These infected are bigger, badder, meaner, faster. They are coming and they are not looking back until they get you. Now, being an infected film as opposed to a zombie film, these rage virus infected humans are not slow at all. They are all gas, there are no brakes, and they're not stopping for anything until they get you, eat you, and kill you. Now, the little difference here between 28 days and 28 weeks later, as opposed to 28 years later, is that it's been 3 decades since these infected humans have had time to grow and mutate along with the virus. So the infected that we're dealing with are bigger, they're stronger, they're faster, and they're smarter. And that puts people like Spike and Jamie and his mom all in this precarious position to try to outsmart these infected, which was already difficult to do in the first place. So now they just have a new layer to deal with. Now, as much as a horror movie fan as I am, and as much as I appreciate the blood and the gore, and what you get in 28 Days Later is plentiful. It's really done well. It's not overdone, but it's done just right, and it looks spectacular. Yeah, there's some CG that's in there that's has to be taken into consideration with filming these days. And I did want to make a point that while Danny Boyle used a Canon XL1 DV camera for 28 Days Later, for 28 years later, he used in part an iPhone. And you wouldn't really even be able to tell. It's just amazing how advanced phones and the cameras on phones are these days. The film was beautifully shot, and he used it to his advantage. But saying that, even past the blood and the guts and the intensity of the film, I think my favorite aspect is just watching 12-year-old Spike have to face all of these challenges, make decision after decision, and become a adult in the process. Probably a little quicker than he had wanted to, but he stepped up to the plate. It's a coming of age horror story, and I think it played out really well. I've seen some negativity coming about this movie, and I really think a big part of that is because the story of Spike and growing up and that coming of age, like we spoke about, just didn't hit well with some people, and that's totally fine. Not every movie is going to play and work well for everyone in the audience, but thankfully for myself, this is one of the better movies that I've seen this year, and I've seen a good chunk since movies are my thing. Now, while I did love the film overall, not everything was perfect. The film did start off super intense, and it really felt like you were just dropped back into this world that we had watched in 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later. However, in the middle of the film, it does get a little bit slow. That doesn't mean that it's bad for doing so or boring in any way, but it felt like they could have injected a little bit more intensity and high impact moments to help speed the film along. It dragged a bit, and I was hoping that wouldn't be the case, especially after the high impact opening of the beginning. Now, when you get to the ending, you might know what I'm talking about with this. Well, this felt like I was in the middle of a Walking Dead episode. There is a scene here at the end where we see Spike all alone and he's starting to fight off a growing number of infected. And then out of nowhere, a kind of goofy, silly group comes to save him. Now, this group is being led by a boy named Jimmy, who we see early on in the film, and it's him kind of grown up now. But his whole group that he's with feels very reminiscent of a character named Pancakes in Eli Roth's Cabin Fever. They even look like him a little bit. If you've seen that film and then you watch this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It felt like a little silly of an ending to put on this movie that was mostly serious tonally. So while I do get where people are coming from regarding maybe that tonal shift towards the end, for the rest of the film, it all felt tonally the same. So I'm interested in why they made that decision with the end of this film. By no means was it terrible or bad in any way. It just felt a little confusing. Now, currently over on Rotten Tomatoes, 28 years later has a 92% critic score, which is a really solid score to have in as you're putting out your film on its opening weekend. It's going to create a lot of positive buzz and get people into the seats. Now, over on the audience side, after it's been out here just for a day or so, it's sitting at a 69% score. I'm not totally surprised by that, considering that this story that they're going with, like I said, feels smaller in scale, and it might not be to everybody's liking, especially after waiting 18 years for this third entry in the franchise. It's going to be a little hit or miss for some folks, but I think overall it's going to be welcomed into this franchise, into this series, and get people ready for the fourth installment that is already being filmed and edited. It will be directed by Nia DaCosta. That name in the horror realm might be familiar. She directed the 2021 legacy reboot sequel of Candyman, which I was a really big fan of. So I'm excited for her to jump on board into this world and see what she'll be able to put forward for us. Overall, for myself, I was pleased with 28 years later. Yeah, there was a few things in there that maybe I would have changed a little bit or expected it to go into a little bit different of a direction. But considering that this is hopefully going to be part of a new trilogy, a 5 film arc altogether from 28 Days Later until its final entry in this franchise, it's all right to kind of pull back a little bit, slow things down, tell a more intimate, smaller story, especially if we follow it up in the next film or two with more of that high octane entertainment and action that we've seen in the previous 2 entries. For myself, it's one of the better films of the year. Not perfect, but a damn solid entry into the 28 Days Later world. And I'm going to settle in at 4 stars out of 5. All right, guys, what did you think of 28 years later? Let me know in the comments below. I will also link my Letterboxd and my Twitter X account in the description if you'd like to continue this conversation. I hope that when you do give this movie a shot, that you enjoy it as much as I did. And if not, you know what? We have 1 or maybe even 2 more entries to look forward to, and hopefully that'll help change your mind. So if you like this video, hit like. If you loved it, you can subscribe. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is to remember, keep watching movies.